Welcome to In Your Element, the podcast that unlocks practical wisdom in higher education, where leadership meets real talk. I'm Brendan Hinkle, Manager of Solutions Engineering here at Element 451.
And I'm Daniela Norden, Element 451's Director of Customer Success and Engagement. Join us every other Thursday for discussions with everyday heroes using Element 451 in enrollment, marketing, and student success. We'll unlock the practical tips to help you make waves on your campus.
In Your Element is a part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below.
Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. All right, everybody, welcome back to In Your Element. I am super excited to welcome our guest and super excited to get the pronunciation right for our guest and the institution. So Cherron R, Chief Experience Officer from Notre Dame. Oh no, I had it up until
you had it close. It's Notre Dame de Namur, right?
I lost it.
There you go.
Oh my goodness.
Is that close enough? Cherron, is that close enough?
Hey, listen, there would be a reason why we call ourselves NDNU. So, yes.
Okay, perfect. Yes.
Thank you.
Right.
Well,
it's good enough,
Cherron,
Daniela.
It is good enough. Thank you. We are super excited to have you. I have to kind of give a little backstory to everybody here because you're not like our typical guest, but you had reached out, just a question about a feature and a functionality and element. And I just remember sitting in this meeting with you and just being so struck by your approach to leadership and the way you sort of answered these questions and how you were able to get high level on some things, but also in the weeds about some other things. And I thought, I cannot be the only one who needs to hear this. Like, other people need to hear from this woman, from this leader. We deal so much with change management, especially when bringing in like new technology. And I would just love for you to just talk about your role as a leader on campus, how you usher in change management, especially when it comes to tech. Higher ed isn't known for being ahead of the curve. So maybe just kind of start there, Cherron, and tell people what your experience has been like.
Yeah, so maybe for some context, I'll give you some background on my career, which is really what has set up my ability to be in the weeds and think strategically. So I started in a full-time position in the mid-90s in housing and residence life. The early days of using the evil C word customer when we talked about servant students. So kind of that full evolution was at a land grant institution, a public in southern New Mexico, and then made the move to California eventually. And once I got there, I ended up at private, not-for-profit, independent institutions, tiny places for the first one. So about 600 students, most of them residential at the first place that I was at, Menlo College. And when you work at those kinds of institutions, you wear all the hats. So my title at the time was like student orientation and leadership and all of that stuff. So I was there when we set up the tables in the morning. I was the one who stood at the podium and welcomed the parents and did you do it all by the time it's over. So went from there to Golden Gate University in San Francisco, larger, very different population, right? Began as a YMCA extension school in the early 1900s. Has only in its history served post-traditional learners, graduate students in professional programs. So a very different kind of dynamic than this small residential. And so learned a lot of stuff there and was given an amazing opportunity that very few get blessed to have. And that was, for years, I was in student affairs and then picked up enrollment management as part of my responsibilities. That one, not such a surprise. But after about 6 years of being there, the president and provost asked me if I would step into the role of an academic dean to serve our post-traditional degree completion. Here I have 15 transcripts. Can you help me make a degree out of it? Student population.
Right.
And it was an amazing experience. And with that, worked with faculty for the first time. I remember the first time I had somebody up for tenure and review, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm happy to go on this trip with you.
Or like, pass, you can have it.
Yeah.
Let's learn together.
And they also asked me to get my doctorate. So I was commuting from San Francisco to Tuscaloosa for the executive EDD program out there. And it was an amazing experience. And so it really became building my chops in academic program development, learning outcomes assessment, and then enrollment management blended with that. So now I tell folks, it's been about 10 years since I left that campus and have been in corporate consulting for a long period of time. But I tell folks, as of today, I've really done everything but be a president or the bursar. And this year especially, but I know just enough about financial aid to be super dangerous. So that's what's given me this opportunity to, I've been the one that wrote the code for degree audit in our student information system, but also I'm the one that has been on WASC peer review teams and helped analyze institutions on the West Coast with WASC. And so really blessed career that gets me to this point to have those kinds of conversations.
I'm sorry, Cherron, I have to interrupt. This is so fascinating because we often talk about specialists and generalists. And I feel like you're at an advantage having experience from enrollment, student affairs, they don't call it student affairs anymore, residential life. And that's not something you see a lot now. You see people who stay in one lane. The fact that you were able to jump around is kind of cool.
Well, and I think this is where institutional sector makes a big difference, right? I have friends and colleagues of mine that ended up at large publics in the Bay Area or some of the elite privates in the Bay Area. And they kind of stayed in their silo and have been there for the length of their career. When you're in these small private independents, and I'm sure my colleagues that serve at them, you've got to be all things to all people because there's lots of times you don't have all the people. And so I could feel myself being very blessed for it. I think the other thing I would say to people is if you ever have a time in your career to be a peer reviewer for one of our accreditors in the US, do it. I have seen institutions of all designs and levels and structures in all kinds of conditions at the brink of special visits and almost losing accreditation, or even those that are getting accreditation for the first time. That for me was like higher ed on 110 miles an hour, but an amazing experience. So I would encourage anybody to, if you have a chance to raise your hand for that, do it because it's spectacular.
Man, I love this. So it's even talking to you, it's just thinking about what, whenever I was in the school side of higher ed and just really, like you said, you have to wear all these hats. And it's so funny. Like, I feel like you've had to wear so many more hats than even the regular person because there's so many hats within department, but you've gone through multiple departments. And I think that gives you, especially with where you are and what you're doing now, it gives you this advantage from a strategic perspective pertaining to change management, which I think is a big thing that we wanted to talk about with you today. Yeah. And this is why I think that you've been able to excel with it so much is change management is huge, especially when you talk about adopting and bringing in technology, because that new technology should impact across, right? It shouldn't just have one focal point. I feel like that's a bad example, a bad piece of software that only has one impact. It should be able to go across, but to be able to deploy something like that, to be able to strategically plan for that change management, your benefit is you've seen a lot of sides of the coin. You know the impact, the processes, and so strategically you have that upper hand. So when you think about that, so this is kind of the preface for the question for you. What strategies do you like to, employ whenever you can come up against resistance to ensure things like smooth transitions, to make sure that there's buy-in and adoption with the tools that are being used? I think that that's such a huge piece for our schools to be successful with technology. So little times it's about capability of the platform. It's really about adoption and buy-in and implementation, and that really kind of the first push of that wave of things. So what tips do you have on that? Kind of what have you seen from your perspective?
For me, it's starting from the get-go with a really honest conversation about why we want to make a change in the first place, right? I think sometimes institutions will change just because they're chasing the shiny new thing. And that's brutal. And it's brutal when they do it too often, right? But for the example of how we came to Element, NDNU is a small institution. They're in a different CRM system that I liken to, like, those like big front end loaders where the tires are as big as a house, right? It's like that kind of CRM. Well, we have fewer than 300 students. Quite frankly, we could be doing what we needed to do in an Excel spreadsheet. So how do we make a good decision about a technology that is going to allow us to breathe, that we're not having to pay a gazillion dollars a year in consulting fees for every little thing that we want to do, that we can get the kind of messaging to students that we want to, that we can begin to think about the future of higher ed with the AI technology, right? All of those things, but do it without killing us, either financially or in terms of the kind of resource that we would need to have on staff. So for me, that's always the start of the conversation, is the why.
Take inventory.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also important to understand all of the different tools that we've got. And if we're not using something and we're not using it to its fullest capacity, bye-bye. Have a good day.
Yep.
Right?
Get it out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Again, I do not know of an institution, and I've consulted at the full breadth of them, even those that have $1 billion in the bank, that have an operating financial structure that can afford just to pay for something and not fully use it. And it creates noise, right, in what you're trying to do. So those kinds of conversations, I think, are the most critical. I think the next piece is to go in with a great deal of empathy, because more often than not, we're not going to be able to build an implementation team to support the operational team, right? We are flying the plane and building it all at once. Better than Boeing, but that's what we're doing, right? Well, no offense to Boeing, but I'm just saying.
That's fantastic.
And so empathy about what that means, and then really helping people figure out, we're going to hurt for this period of time. It's just inevitable. What's the stuff that matters and what doesn't matter? And if it doesn't matter or it can be postponed, then we're going to shove it to the side, because this does matter. This implementation does matter. So I think that's kind of the next phase of helping people kind of settle in to what we're doing. The biggest thing for me, though, is if you are beating your new technology into submission, so it does exactly what your old technology was doing, then you probably don't need new technology.
Preach.
Yeah.
Cherron, we're going to get you up on the altar. You're going to be preaching. Listen.
Print it, mail it, put it on all the walls. Like, it's so true. We have so many partners who try to shoehorn or who try to say, this is exactly how we did it here. And it doesn't allow them to optimize what we have. It actually holds them back, I think.
Yeah. I was in a conversation with a school that was looking to bring in Element literally last week. And they were talking about seeing how they use the word, I won't say the other vendor that they're currently using on the call, but they're like, hey, this is how we're doing this in this platform. Can we show you that? And you show us how we do that in your platform. And my comeback was, listen, what the platform you're describing is apples to oranges with Element. Like, what I need you to send me is, what are your goals? What are you aiming to accomplish? And then I can show you how we do it, because we're looking at platforms like that and we're telling you, they've got it wrong, right? Our approach is different than what they're doing. I can show you how we're doing it, and we're doing it better. And really the light bulb went off in their head in that moment. They're like, okay, well, that makes sense. Yeah. And I think that that's so incredibly important, because you have to, like you said, make the hard decisions. Is it going to be comfort or is it going to be growth? Yeah. And that's where the decisions have to be made, because a lot of times it's not comfortable to change. Yeah. Human nature resists change. And so you have to make that decision. Are we looking to grow? Are we looking to stay comfortable? Because if we're looking to stay comfortable, and some people are just looking to stay comfortable, then just stick with what you have. Yeah. Don't look, don't look, because it's going to be a failure if you decide to take that plunge.
I couldn't agree more.
Cherron, I want to go back to something you said about cutting the noise and like helping people figure out what is important and what is not important. How do you do that? Can you tell me? Can you give me tips?
Yeah, right. Our own noise in our lives. I think part of it is, and I find this a lot on teams, where nobody's given someone permission to say, by the way, I'm wasting my time in this, or help me understand why I'm doing this. And this was actually something I learned in working with the adult learner and post-traditional students. What I found in designing academic programs for those students was that they will do anything you ask of them as long as you can contextualize why, and as long as you can show evidence of its relevance to making their life better, right? So the number one thing that you hear in these kind of programs is, why am I taking philosophy? I want business. Why do I have to be in philosophy? Well, one, as faculty, let's make courses that are really rock solid and relevant to today's workplace, right? That's our responsibility. And number two, student, here's why we're doing this. Here are the skills that you can take that are like, there are things from the Socratic method that have value, those kinds of things. And I think the same thing at work is to give context about the why. Why do we need to change? What's our objective within this?
Right.
What does it mean for my world? Right? Because at the end of the day in change management, that's fine that you have these institutional goals. I want to know what happens when I come to work and I log into my systems in the morning, because I want to do my job well. So what does this mean?
That absolutely helps. I think it's two things, understanding the why too. And something else that you said last time we spoke that really struck me was, if it's not being comfortable saying, I'm wasting my time, you're throwing the tech under the bus. Like, that seems to be a go-to for people. Oh, well, the technology
easy
can't
way
do
out.
this,
Yeah.
right? It's the easy way out. And one of the things you said was, why do people do that? Why do they go right there? How do you get them to overcome imposter syndrome or not knowing how to implement or how to use that tool, and make the tech not a scapegoat in those instances?
Even if something as simple as growing pains, because like we said, they're going to have them. It's going to happen. So that's a good question. How do you overcome that?
Yeah. And I would say, I'm an old lady and I've seen a lot of it. And except for one system, I can honestly say, of the technologies that I've experienced in higher ed, the tech itself is good. It is, for the most part, rock solid. It's not going to deliver on everything that somebody else's tech does, but it is rock solid. And where I see the wheels fall off is in the implementation process, and then this need to over customize to the point that you cannot participate in upgrades easily. You cannot get support from the tech folks that are there. You haven't written any documentation about the decisions you've made. So when you win the lottery, the rest of us are just in deep poop. And right. And so those are the pieces for me that it's not about a technology failure. It's about our failure as users and leaders for not making sure those things are happening.
That over customization happens so often. It's people thinking, I know best, or I got to tweak it to make it look this way. And all you're doing is sort of taking away from what that tech can do, Gosh, that's such a good point, Cherron. Such a good point.
Yeah. And you brought up implementation right there, and it's the emphasis and the importance of implementation. So whenever you look at implementation and whenever that's going on, especially with new technologies like Element 451 and others that you've experienced, how are you looking at those tools? In kind of what lens are you looking? Are you looking at it from how it affects the student experience? Are you looking at it through the lens of how it affects the end users? And really, what metrics are you looking at to measure the effectiveness of whatever you're implementing? How do you know it's a success at that point, right? And obviously, it's probably a mix of both. But I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah. So I was going to say yes and yes and yes.
Yes. All those things.
When I have the opportunity to be at the table at the earliest point in implementation, one of the first things I want to begin to think about is, what do we need out of the system? What are we going to have to report on? What do we need to understand as KPIs for the institution, for accreditation, for all of those pieces? Because often what we need to have in those structures are decisions that should be made along the way for implementation. So where Danielle and I got the chance to meet was in a conversation about kind of, how does Element interpret the funnel report? How do I make sure that from a strategic perspective, I understand those key and important milestones that we need to make decisions on, right? We're at crunch time. We're 2 weeks away from the start. How do I look at where my conversion rates might be failing and put all hands on deck in a particular place, right? So those are the kinds of things that I want to be able to think about at the end and be able to answer through the implementation process. I think all too often, though, we kind of open up the owner's manual of whatever it is and we start with the beginning in mind. And then we have huge gaps and get to the back end. And it's like, but I needed to know this. Well, yeah, you knew that 6 months ago. Why didn't you figure out how to answer that question then?
I love this. I feel like we start implementation and people are so excited and then they get a little overwhelmed or they don't have the right team and they lose sight of those end goals that were so, so important. And knowing those at the beginning has made our implementation so much more successful. Yeah. When the team is aligned, when they have direction, when they know what they're working towards, and when they can close the critical thinking gap between, okay, this is how the funnel report works, but this is why I need it, or these are the numbers that I need, or how to get it. It makes the implementation much more successful. It makes the team much more successful. My question to you, though, Cherron, is sometimes we get bogged down in the day-to-day. We get like you want to know how to pull that one number or how that funnel is converting. How do you help the team remember those goals and that big picture and that long-term vision?
It's fun, but part of the conversation for me is
it's fun.
Yeah, but part of the conversation for me is, that would be lovely to know, but how is it actionable? What is that going to do for us in an assessment strategy? So I'll give you an example. One of the things, NDNU has got this amazing history, long time as a residential undergraduate institution. In 2020, completely pivoted. No more on-ground residential. Focus is very much post-traditional graduate, which is part of why I've landed there on staff now, is that's an area of my expertise. And so as we were going through in the pre-implementation process, looking at the old application for admission, and it was asking things like marital status and religious preference and rate in an optional area of the application. And I'm like, wow, all fascinating things that we might want to know about our student profiles someday. But what does this mean about making an admissions decision? One, it makes us vulnerable because we're asking questions that
you shouldn't be making admissions decisions based off of. Right.
Right.
Good point.
Right. And the other piece of it is that that's just one more pause that our prospective student has to make to get that funnel rolling for them. So if we need it and it's purposeful, I say the same thing about having resumes as a requirement. If you're going to go out and validate employment because you think that's going to contribute to a student's success in the program, have a resume. If not, get rid of it. And most places don't do anything with it, and it has no value or meaning to the actual success of the student. So those are the kinds of buttons that I tend to push on at that stage of and to keep people focused on what's most critical.
When it works, it works. But before we do our final sort of wrap-up question, I wanted to talk about just the role of Chief Experience Officer. I feel like this is a new-ish term and title we have heard. Hearing your background makes you sound like you're well suited because the student experience really extends beyond what we know as marketing and enrollment, admissions, student success. What is a Chief Experience Officer on a campus? What does that mean now?
So I have to say, I think the standard bearer for this kind of position on campus is probably at Southern New Hampshire University, which isn't surprising because they've been so groundbreaking in so many areas. And in their model, they actually have all of those pieces that you just mentioned reporting to that chief experience officer. So
interesting.
It really is a sense of how do you create an environment that is student-centric, that understands all of the opportunities for bringing the student along to success beyond graduation, essentially. And so really a cool model there. When Beth Martin, the president at NDNU, and I were talking about this role and what the right kind of title would be for me coming in, the idea of it was, is this is a part-time position for me. I also still do private consulting, and I'm also affiliated with Texas A&M Kingsville and some work down there too. So lots of fun stuff. And so really thinking about where does my energy need to be for this part-time role? Probably not on managing staff, probably not on those components, but there really was a need for somebody who understood all of the silos that tend to form on a campus and could figure out how to pull the right people into the room to be solutions focused. And because of this pivot on top of it, we really needed to think about a new and different student than what the history of the institution was focused on. And so that's where we came up with this idea of it being a student experience officer. And really, it allows me to have the fun of sticking my fingers into every pie. So yeah.
And affecting change. I think that's the important piece here. I love the shout out to Southern New Hampshire. We have talked about Seth Odell, another Enrollify creator who came up through Southern New Hampshire, Emmy Award winning. We love Seth. He's a disruptor too. And I think that we have that in common. You have that in common with him. So another great example.
Yeah. And you guys can clip this out if you want to, but I'll share my Seth Odell story. So he and I both landed at an OPM in about 2015 or so. I knew that there was a human that was behind the Southern New Hampshire bus ads when I was sitting in San Francisco trying to grow my undergraduate adult population. Like, I went to my board and said, this is how we can be Southern New Hampshire, the West Coast. So knew those ads, love those ads, hated those ads, right? Because here it was, my competitor is now in my backyard with more money than I will ever dream of having. And so all of a sudden, Seth joins the team where I was the chief academic officer. And I remember the first day I walked into his office and I said, so I hate you already. How are we going to figure out how to work together? and we have, and still to this day, really do. I'll work on some projects at Cannon Home every once in a while with him. We connect a lot. I just have so much respect for Seth. But he and I together, like, it's like, oh, let's fix the world because we love higher ed. This is our jam. So it's fun.
You know what's cool about that story, though? Everybody has that story. I'm sure, Brendan, you've got somebody that you've met who you wanted to be the Southern New Hampshire of. I absolutely have that story. And I have that story where you do have that envy or that jealousy. Mallory Wilsey is actually that person for me. She knocks it out of the park on everything that she does. And then when you connect, you're like, holy crap, like this is collaboration. This is, that's something. Everybody's got that story and everybody's got that person in higher ed. And we love to see it. We're keeping that story in.
Okay. Well,
100%.
I'm president of the Seth fan club. So there you go.
Awesome. Well, there is one question we haven't asked yet that we have to ask. And that is, when are you in your role, what you're doing in your element, whether it has to do with element or not? When are you in your element? And I will say, we started this trend in a previous episode of trying to guess what you were going to say. I think I have my finger on the pulse of what you're going to say.
Tell me.
So I'm going to give it a go. Should I do it? Should I put my magic 8 ball? Should I put my hat on? All right. So everything I've heard and what we talked about today from you has been focalized on strategizing and preparation, not so much in execution. And it seems to me that everything that we've been talking about, whether it's change management, whether it's implementation, your first response for best practice is preparation. Take inventory, look at this. So I think you're in your element when you're able to strategize and kind of really prepare for taking a step, right? It's the whole methodology of think before you speak. But in this case, it's think before you take action and really kind of take that step. So I see you as really that methodical, like that's when you're really in your element. That's what I've taken away from it. You can, please don't feel pressure to use. I don't need to be right. You can prove me wrong. No. But I think that's what I've taken.
Yeah, I think you've hit it on the head, Brendan. And I do. And I love that. And I love helping teams, helping individuals, helping institutions do exactly that. And I think the other piece for me too, if you hadn't picked up on it, I love what I do. It is hard, challenging, difficult work from my earliest days of being a residence hall manager in grad school to what I do now as a consultant, but I can't imagine doing anything else. So how could you not get excited? How could you not when you really love what you do? And so those things married together, that's when, like, if it's about higher ed, it's my jam. So
I love that.
You know what, Cherron? I think Brendan and I both needed this conversation today. So I just want to say thank you. We have had a long day. We were like, okay, we're going to rally for this. We didn't have to rally. This was incredible. I think your passion and that love really does shine through. And it's good for us to remember why we do what we do, Brendan. So thank you for energizing us today and energizing, hopefully, all of our listeners too. This was really great to have you here.
Well, thank you. It was my complete and total pleasure. This was fun. So thank you.
In Your Element is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too.
Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional.
Our shows help higher ed marketers and enrollment professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from Mallory Wilsey, Artis Kadu, Maya Demishkovich, and so many other of your favorite leaders in higher ed.
Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.